So in terms of like the economic prospects for African music in America, I think that we're still kind of exploring and we're still learning. And the majority of American listeners don't have the context yet to fully understand what's happening. It is growing, and I think it's growing quickly. And I think some of the artists that you mentioned earlier are responsible for that. One of them is on this panel. But there is a lot that still needs to be done, and I think a lot of that work rests on the shoulders of a lot of the people in this room, people who are first generation, maybe second generation, people who move back and forth between the continent and the Western world, and who are part of that education process for some of the American listeners who haven't really figured it out yet. I first started to really learn about what was happening back home when my sisters would visit Nigeria. This is in 08, 09. Because it took me about 15 years to get back. I hadn't gone from 04 until this last December. But my younger sisters were going a lot. So they would come back and be like, yo, you gotta hear this, you gotta listen to this. And it took me a little bit of time to fully wrap my ears around it as a fan. Now I feel like I'm really, really in it, but there is an education process, I think, for the average listener to fully grasp what's going on. A lot of these people think that it's reggae music, you know what I mean? So, just to be honest with you. So I think that it's extremely promising and the prospects are amazing, and I think that these next few years will accelerate very quickly. But there's an education process here in the Western world. The other half of it is the growth of technology on the continent and the access to tools to create music and internet and all that stuff so people can stream. All that stuff is still being developed, and I feel like the quicker that gets developed, the quicker the music will spread organically around the world. I feel like I'm answering your question. Okay, also just let me say real quickly, this is incredible to be on a panel in front of faces like this. I'm sure everybody up here does a lot of panels. It don't usually look like this. So, I'm just very happy to be here, and I hope that answered your question. The biggest revenue stream I would say right now for the majority of artists is live and touring, especially on the continent. And again, that there's a lot of infrastructure that's, I think, missing, that still needs to be built in terms of proper venues and proper touring routes. But the majority of people are making their money off of shows, which takes us back to the question about streaming and the kind of the untapped potential of the audience. He mentioned what happened with K-pop in terms of the community going online and then it kind of triggering this domino effect around the world. Same thing happened in Latin music. You can remember the first wave of this reggaeton thing 10, 12 years ago with Daddy Yankee and Don Omar, and it was almost as if it generated interest, but it wasn't a global thing yet. But once in Latin America, internet prices went down, data prices went down, that audience came online, all of a sudden you could see Spanish songs on American radio and Latin artists touring globally. So I think a similar thing is going to happen in the African space. Hopefully, and like he said, it'll come on in the next 3 to 5 years. And once that happens, you'll see, you'll hear a lot more of that music in the mainstream in the Western world. I think another huge untapped market for revenue is merchandising. I don't think a lot of African artists have fully tapped into that and fully tapped into building a brand that aligns with your music. Some of them are doing it well, but I think that's another space that's going to grow rapidly in the next few years. And I think that this generation of African kids, I think this generation of fans is different than our parents' generation because a creative career is not taboo to us. Whereas I think a lot of us, if any of y'all want to do music or made music or did anything creative when you were coming up, your parents were kind of you know, my parents didn't really get it until I started working with Wizkid, and then they're like, oh, like, we know that guy, but like, you know, when it was like Kendrick and stuff, they were like, huh, like, yeah, they thought I was still rapping, which, you know, maybe I was, but yeah, I mean, I think that there's a generational shift that's also happening that's gonna make for more creativity, more avenues and more pathways for creatives to make money and to even have the dream to even want to do this. Because, you know, I remember when I was growing up, a career in the creative arts or in music was sort of like, huh? Like, it was really, you should really be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. But I feel like this generation is sort of like, I'm just gonna do what I want to do and I'm gonna figure it out. And there are a lot of different ways to dream bigger in this generation.